When our coalition's exploration drones stumbled across the Sol system, no one expected much. A quick scan of the planets revealed a pretty boring spread. Just a collection of lifeless rocks and swirling gas giants. Nothing unusual, nothing to write home about. Well, except for the third planet. From the first pass of the scanners, Earth was different. Alive, teeming with biodiversity, covered in liquid water. But strangely, this water wasn't pristine. It was littered with floating clumps of trash and odd little artificial islands of debris. As the probe got closer, it picked up scattered signs of civilization. Buildings, roads, and most peculiarly, an enormous halo of junk surrounding the planet. Abandoned satellites, broken stations, and failed attempts at space travel. Turns out, the debris wasn't just random. It was a side effect of Earth's dominant life form, a sapient species called humans. From what we gathered, there were roughly 8 billion of them, highly social, technologically curious, but a little clumsy when it came to space. It looked like they had tried to venture beyond their planet but failed repeatedly. The low orbits surrounding Earth looked more like a scrapyard than a highway to the stars. So, the probe did what it was supposed to. It kept scanning, gathering data. But after a couple of weeks it had to move on. There was a much more promising star system nearby, full of resources we actually cared about. Earth, at that point, was considered a planetary footnote. Sure, it had life. Sure, the humans were intelligent in their own way. But they were moving painfully slow. Most of our analysts estimated that it would take them at least 4 more centuries just to build viable spacefaring ships, and even longer to figure out FTL travel. Honestly, they were the slowest developing race we'd ever encountered. Usually, once a species got a taste of space, they went all in. It became their obsession, but not the humans. A few months later, trouble erupted back home. 2 of our coalition's member species, the war-hardened Zanzi and the gentler, recently inducted Donic, got into a conflict. Everyone knew the Donic weren't at fault. They were peaceful, soft-spoken, and still learning how to be part of a galactic civilization. But nobody wanted to cross the Zanzi, not with their brutal military force and political influence. So the Zanzi swept in and wiped out one of the Donic homeworlds, sterilized it clean. 52 colossal colony ships, dozens of support freighters and transports, 7 billion Donic refugees, those who hadn't been enslaved or killed, jumped to the Sol system, alone, no escorts. No guarantees, just a one-way trip to a backwater planet. And then, we waited. Several weeks later, we dispatched a second probe. This one equipped to monitor the interaction between Earth's native species and the Donic. What it found shocked us. Earth hadn't rejected them. In fact, every major human government, of which there were many, accepted the Donic with open arms. Massive cities sprang up almost overnight, entire industrial zones humming with activity. It wasn't just Donic tech making this possible either. The humans themselves were adapting, learning, building. By the time the probe reached Earth, nearly half the Donic ships were still in orbit, repurposed as temporary stations. The clutter of orbital debris was already disappearing. Earth was being cleaned up, reshaped, and rebuilt before our eyes. And the humans? They were thriving. The footage stunned our analysts. Within mere weeks, humans were using enormous mobile factories, machines that could print entire buildings, to construct livable zones for the Donic. These weren't ramshackle settlements either. They were full-fledged cities, massive and functional. Meanwhile, Donic freighters, previously used for hauling supplies, had been modified by humans to mine asteroids nearby. The materials were funneled back to Earth to build even more infrastructure. And even more surprisingly, ships. Yes, ships. Human-made ones. You see, the Donic had brought along their tech, particle shields, rudimentary FTL drives, basic plasma weaponry. And the humans? They tore it all apart, studied it, understood it, and then they improved it. Vehicles that once rolled on wheels were retrofitted with anti-grav nodes. Human engineers began producing spacecraft that were uniquely their own. Sleeker, faster. The Zansi fleet approached Sol with confidence. Why wouldn't they? They were bringing 100 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, including one of their dreadnoughts, a behemoth capable of cracking a planet in half. Their plan was simple. Rally near the largest gas giant in the system, regroup, then strike Earth with overwhelming force. A quick, decisive blow. The kind they'd done countless times before. Except this time, something was different. A small fleet of human ships, maybe a dozen cruisers, waited in orbit around Earth. They weren't intimidating at first glance. Smaller, lighter, but clearly designed for speed. Purpose-built for combat. As the Zansi passed through the asteroid belt, their long-range scans picked up more human vessels. Dozens more. Ships jumping in from across the system. Earth's fleet wasn't just waiting. They were gathering and growing. By the time the Zansi reached the inner planets, the human armada had swelled to nearly the same size as theirs. No one expected that. Even more startling, the human ships weren't just modified Donic vessels anymore. They were new. Original. Custom-built warcraft with advanced armor, dense shield arrays, and powerful weapon systems. Fully FTL capable, fully combat ready. And then, the human fleet moved. They didn't wait to be attacked. As the Zansi fleet approached Mars, the humans jumped to intercept. A red wasteland turned battlefield. There, in orbit above a dusty, lifeless world, the most unexpected engagement in Coalition history began. The battle wasn't a one-sided slaughter. It was a slugfest. Human cruisers traded volleys with Zansi destroyers. Newly built battleships went blow for blow with Zansi carriers. For every human ship brought down, another seemed to take its place. And while the Zansi were seasoned warriors, the humans fought like a species with something to prove. Each maneuver was ruthless, efficient, calculated. This wasn't desperation. This was execution. Within hours, the tide shifted. Half of the Zansi fleet was gone. Their dreadnought, though still operational, had taken damage. Its shields flickered. Its flanks were exposed. Sensing their vulnerability, the Zansi began a retreat. They tried to turn, to jump away, to regroup. But Earth wasn't about to let them escape. 3 of the largest human carriers launched waves of rapid strike transports. Small, agile vessels designed not for combat, but for boarding. Each transport latched onto a specific Zansi ship. Carriers, cruisers, even the dreadnought. And then, they vanished. Gone. Jumped out of the system. Transponders silent. Back on Mars, the human fleet held position. Victorious. Waiting. Watching. Expecting another attack. But the Zansi ships never returned. The surviving Zansi fleet limped back to Coalition space, humiliated. They'd never lost a battle like this. Not ever. A full strike group, outfitted with every resource the Zansi military could spare. Beaten back by a single planet and a species the Senate once laughed at. Shock rippled through the Coalition. The Zansi were outraged, furious. They demanded answers. How had this happened? How had one of their dreadnoughts gone missing? The Admiralty blamed the commanding officer, accused him of incompetence. There were calls for court-martials, executions, but when their fleets arrived to rendezvous with the remnants of the first strike force, they saw something no one expected. The dreadnought, the one presumed lost, was still there, just hovering, surrounded by its usual complement of carriers and support ships, intact, quiet. At first, the Zansi commanders were relieved. Maybe the reports had been wrong. Maybe their flagship had survived and was simply regrouping. But something was off. The dreadnought's massive planetary cannons were charged, glowing, powered up, and pointed directly at the approaching fleet. Now, this shouldn't have happened. Coalition protocol strictly forbade keeping dreadnought cannons primed unless preparing to fire. The energy draw was immense. Shielding systems would falter. Cooling units would overheat. It was dangerous. But here it was, fully armed and ready to shoot. That's when the realization hit. This ship wasn't under Zansi control anymore. Before the admirals could give the order to scatter, the dreadnought fired. All 4 main cannons discharged simultaneously. Each beam was a planet killer, the destructive equivalent of thousands of nuclear bombs. The blasts struck with precision. No warning, no negotiation. 4 Zansi capital ships were crippled in seconds, shields obliterated, reactors fried, support vessels vaporized in the shockwave. The dreadnought's strike had caught them completely off guard. And before the admirals could recover, before they could even shout a full order, 60 human ships jumped into formation. The same ships from Mars, the same fleet that had wrecked the first Zansi invasion. They locked onto the crippled Zansi vessels and launched wave after wave of strike craft. It was a slaughter. 4 days later, the Zansi signed an unconditional surrender. The Terran Union, a new political alliance forged between humans and Donic refugees, was officially recognized by the coalition. Under the terms of the treaty, the Zansi handed over everything. Their slaves, their ships. For the first time in coalition history, the most feared power in the galaxy, once believed to be unstoppable, had been brought to its knees. The Zansi, masters of conquest, architects of countless subjugations, had been decisively and irreversibly defeated by humans. It sent ripples through every known civilization. Species that once cowered under the shadow of the Zansi began to speak out. Protests flared. Alliances shifted. Small, previously irrelevant planetary governments began reaching out to the Terran Union, seeking protection, collaboration, or even just understanding. Who were these humans? How did they do it? The answers were as startling as the outcome. The humans, in truth, had no vast empire. No ancient spacefaring heritage. They weren't born among the stars or trained by more advanced species. They were, by all galactic standards, new. A race of inventors and improvisers, fueled by necessity and tempered by centuries of internal conflict. But what they lacked in history, they made up for with something much rarer: adaptability. Once given the tools, Donic tech, FTL systems, particle shields, they didn't just copy, they evolved. Their scientists didn't need lifetimes to understand new systems, they needed months. Engineers took apart entire starships and rebuilt them, better, faster, more lethal. Weapons once used to defend became tools to dominate. Their factories, designed to print buildings, now printed fleets. And unlike other races that viewed war as ritual or tradition, humans approached it as a challenge, a puzzle, one to be solved, dismantled, and rebuilt with terrifying efficiency. But perhaps most shocking of all was their approach to unity. The coalition had always viewed humans as fractured. Dozens of governments, languages, belief systems. A chaotic swarm of ideologies that somehow shared one planet without tearing themselves apart. Yet in the face of existential threat, those differences didn't matter. When the Dalek arrived, Earth didn't squabble. When the Zansi struck, Earth, perhaps the most fascinating development, though, was cultural. Species that had once mocked human inefficiency now studied their films, read their literature, and tried to decipher the chaotic energy that powered their innovations. Galactic universities added human history to their curriculums. Military academies rewrote doctrines based on Earth's defense of Mars. And then there was the philosophy, this strange, contradictory drive that made humans so human. Hope in the face of doom. Laughter in the heart of despair. A belief that no matter how dark the galaxy became, light could always be found, or forged. The coalition had never seen anything like it. In time, the Terran Union grew from a coalition of necessity to a symbol of potential. Humanity didn't just recover from near oblivion. They uplifted others with them. They taught the Dalek how to defend themselves. They rebuilt shattered worlds. And they gave voice to those who had none. One by one, systems abandoned the old ways. The old power structures faded, and in their place rose something new. Not an empire, not a dictatorship, but a promise. That even in the cold vastness of space, even in a galaxy of warlords and tyrants, there was still room for compassion, for collaboration, for resilience. And so the galaxy changed. Not with the boom of war cannons or the flash of superweapons, but because a single, underestimated species from a forgotten corner of the stars refused to give up. Except, well, the humans.